Hello and welcome to JPod. This is a podcast on journalists and journalism. I'm your host, Krishna Prasad. For several days now, we have looked at the deep impact coronavirus is having on our profession across the country and across the world. But we have mostly looked at it through the eyes of journalists and broadcasters and editors. What has been missing from this series of conversations is the point of view, the voice of those who write our paychecks, the owners and proprietors. You could argue that it is perhaps only appropriate that we journalists, especially print journalists, should only wonder about our own jobs and our own salaries and our own careers, and solely from the perspective of our own lives and families. But what is going through the minds of those who own and run enterprises, some of which belong to families which have been in the journalism business for more than 100 years? How do they, the owners and proprietors, the Maliks as we call them in Delhi, how do the owners and proprietors look at a potential meltdown in the media caused by coronavirus and what it could do to operations in the short to medium term? This is a question that's been bugging me for a long time now. And there are not too many people in the business better placed than my guest for JPod today to explain what is going through the minds of the Malik, through the minds of owners and proprietors. N.Ram has been the editor-in-chief of the Hindu and the Hindu Business Line and its magazines Frontline and Sports Star. He has been a groundbreaking investigative journalist who honed his skills at the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia University. And now he's the chairman of the Hindu Publishing Group, the publishers of the Hindu newspaper. Mr. Ram joins me today from his home in Chennai, and I welcome him to this episode of JPod. Mr. Ram, it's wonderful to talk to you once again, although these are not very pleasant times to be talking in, but it's great to have you, sir, and I really welcome you here.
Krishna, it'll be a pleasure to have this conversation with you, although I should say I'm pleased to have this conversation with you, although it's not a pleasure for either of us to discuss this subject.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. Mr. Ram, the Hindu is one of India's great newspapers. It's been around for over 130 years. And like a few other family-owned newspapers, it has had the fantastic reputation of being a benevolent employer, which has placed the employee center and front at all times. What is going through your mind as the man in charge of the group at a point like this, at a crisis like this? What is going through your mind and how are you viewing the situation?
I think the business is in danger. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the business is in danger. For a lot of media organizations in the country, some may have deep pockets and be able to weather the storm. But right now, going by what's happened over the last month or so, there is no doubt that this is an unprecedented challenge for survival. I'm not exaggerating, but we hope that this will not continue for too long and there'll be some kind of recovery. We don't know about it. It's uncertain. Why I say this is that advertising has collapsed over the last month. In the month of the last month, although we were able to pay salaries for March, advertising has collapsed, and it's not an exaggeration to say collapse. It's not just a decline. Advertising has been in ad revenues have been in steady decline over the past several months, and you could even say there was some kind of ad recession, ad market recession for the newspaper industry. Not just for us, I think many other, at least English language newspapers about which I know something, have been, have seen this steady decline. But now it's a collapse. Now the question is, what kind of recovery will happen?
That's right.
It's clear, one thing is clear that it can't be business as before. And whenever the recovery happens, you're going to see a new normal established for revenues. And revenues, as you know, are largely come from advertising. It used to be for large newspapers, something like 80%, 70, 80, even 90% in some cases Now it's going to come down to whatever. Internationally, of course, circulation revenues have overtaken ad revenues, and that has happened before. But right now, we do not know the extent to which the new normal, will be established. The extent of the decline, or the drop.
Yeah. This crisis, of course, is unprecedented, as you rightly said. But obviously, India is in a slightly different boat compared to newspapers in the US. Let's say the leading papers in the US and UK. I think we are in a slightly different position. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yes, we are in a different position, because mature media markets have seen this much earlier. They didn't need a pandemic crisis to enforce
Yeah.
whatever they've been doing.
Yeah.
But of course, because we have been buffered by this the print circulation growth, readership growth, and to some extent, at least until 7, 8 years ago, good ad revenue growth. I would say we were in denial. We thought, I remember an INS, actually the World Media Summit.
Yes.
I think a projection was given that India has time till 2040
Right.
before before what was happening there would happen here, and that to me, they said this was an industry consensus,
Yes.
and I think that said it all. That we were in denial, but the last few years nobody has been in denial. There's, they've seen this, they've seen the effects of digitization, entering the digital world quite clearly. But what to do about it, it's varied. We can discuss it. One thing I can say that after this, after this crisis is over and you establish a new normal, you'll see virtually all the significant media, newspaper organizations in the country will put their content behind some kind of paywall, the digital content, that is. It can't be free. There'll be very few that'll be free. We were one of the first to do it. I think in early 2019, it was a soft paywall. And in October, it became a metered paywall, and now I think it's fully operational. It's not a hard paywall in the sense you can still get 10 and now 20 clicks free. But I think you're going to see this speeding up, acceleration of the process of migration to a paywall.
Yes. When we keep hearing this phrase "new normal" quite a lot lately, I mean, it's a phrase which really makes me uncomfortable, because you don't know what to expect. If everything is the new normal, you don't know what to expect. But looking at this situation, what to you will be the new normal? You mentioned, a paywall behind digital content could be one of the components of the new normal. What else do you expect? Do you expect salary cuts, job cuts, digitization? What else would you expect going forward, beyond what we have seen so far?
Salary cuts are already in the works. It's happened in various newspapers, and even in the Hindu. The union has agreed. It's not enforced yet. The final. We are talking about slabs like top management, including the directors, the whole-time directors, will take a cut of 25%. And then it's got for those below 40,000 and below, it'll no cuts at all. And I think they've come forward. The editors initiated it.
Right.
They are inevitable, I think.
Right.
For now, just for this quarter.
Right. Right. So therefore, that brings me to my key question. You have been part of this family for so long. You now run the family business in a way. How do you view this? I mean, this is a really depleting moment, if you ask me. You say it's a crisis moment. You say it's a collapse. But how do you, in terms of an emotion, how do you look at this, going forward? I mean, it looks like things are going to be extremely bleak even after a paywall.
Yes, because digital, there's no way, it's not a magic bullet, and digital revenues are not going to compensate for what you lost over the years in advertising, and whatever you're going to lose, the the precipitous drop that people are expecting. That's what they mean by the new normal. We don't know what that is. From, say, if it was 60 crores a month ad revenue, now if it drops to 45, let's say.
Yeah.
That sort of thing would be something like, it's a cliche, I agree, no, because nobody knows what kind of normal is it that you're not aware, you're no clue about what it is. But that kind of thing would be, is illustrative of what we're talking about. It could be that. If it's 100 crores, it may drop to 70 crores or 80 crores, depending on the strength of the market, the recovery. Because as we discussed earlier, offline, Krishna, you were the one who pointed out when people are not selling anything, what are they going to advertise?
Yeah. No, these salary cuts, which the Hindu itself has proposed, as you said,
Yes.
Is this to protect the enterprise, or was this inevitable in a sense? In the sense, one of the doubts that exists in the minds of many journalists is this simple doubt, that owners and proprietors and managers are cutting salaries, although it's a very small component of the overall top line. So I'm trying to understand where employers are coming from when they suggest these small 10, 15, 20% cuts. Does this really help the bottom line in the end?
For the Hindu group, totals proportion of salaries and wages take up, I think, a much higher share than for any other major group. So we have done some comparisons. Right. And that is there. So it will make a substantial difference, but it's not going to bail you out. It's just that one of the measures, and there's no question of directors not doing this. I was I'm not happy at all about this, this trend, because we were resisting it. Historically, if you go back when photo composition was introduced, that came in the early 80s. In fact, it started in the late 70s for the Hindu. And the whole business of, hot lead tie, all that changed. There was a lot of anxiety among the workers. Of course. So the management, the owners made a promise to the union. G. Kasturi was the editor and the head of the organization at that time. But Murli and I, N. Murli, my brother, and I were also very active, as well as some others also. But a clear commitment was made that nobody would lose their job. They would be retrained, many of them, and the pace of adaptation was most impressive. Even the foreign suppliers said that this was quicker than anything else they'd seen elsewhere. So that is a historical tradition. So we can't be happy about it, and we hope that this will be purely temporary. These cuts, because you can't survive on cutting. It'll tell on the quality of your journalism. It'll tell on everything, your reputation. It'll tell on the well-being of staff members, workers in particular. But then, as I said, anybody drawing less than 40,000 a month, no cuts.
Yeah, no, that's nice to hear.
Ask the question. Yes, it is to. Without it, it'll be very difficult for business to go on. Yes, that is a fact. But it's not going to. It's not going to compensate for all that is being lost right now.
Correct. One of the points the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, made last week, point number 6, was about protecting jobs and protecting salaries. And, it seems like open season within the media, the Times of India, the Hindustan Times, Dainik Bhaskar. A whole lot of employers have embarked on this path now. And there really seems to be no stopping, in a sense.
Yes, I think about Mr. Modi, you know what, they say one thing, and then what about the dearness to allowance? It's announced. So it's just like the citizenship thing, that they speak in different voices, contradictions and so on. So when you say this, then the government should put its money where its mouth is, and it's got a lot of resources. It just has to spend it. Look at what some of the other countries are doing.
Absolutely.
Now the UK or even the United States, they're putting a lot of, particularly in the UK, I think they've guaranteed, salaries, minimum salaries, and so on. So nothing like that has been done here. But that is not to escape the responsibility of the media. Yes, what you observe, I think, is happening, and
No, when you
even
speak of
even those who can afford to pay the full salaries, I think, are perhaps taking advantage of the situation to to improve that. I don't know if you can call it top line. But
yeah. Our common friend Gurbir Singh of the Mumbai Press Club,
yes,
he had joined me on an episode of JPod, the podcast, and he was mentioning particularly the irony of newspaper managements going, especially as the Indian Newspaper Society, going to the government and asking for a tax holiday, for a cut on GST, for a cut on customs duty, etc. It seems to be that newspaper managements are very keen to seek sops from the government at this point of time. But from the perspective of journalists, they seem to be less inclined to kind of back journalists' salaries and jobs. That's the point of view Gurbir was making. How would you view something like that?
I would agree with that. Yes, I don't think it's healthy to go to the government and plead for relief and so on, because that immediately increases your, or compromises your independence. You can
Absolutely.
make demands on if something is unjust and so on, but to go and ask for sops, as you put it, I think it's not a healthy thing, and you're not going to go and ask. Although I think it's illegal for governments to discriminate in the allocate against particular media organizations, whether it's a newspaper or something like NDTV. To deny them ads, I think, is not just unjust; it is illegal. It's open to challenge, but we are not. We don't go to the government. It happened to the Hindu also after Rafale. The central government stopped all ads, but we are not going to go and petition the government for removing this block and so on. If you're going to take up that issue, you better fight it in court, or write about it. But we don't. And I agree with Gurbir that yes, the double standards are being applied. They want relief for themselves in all the ways you mentioned, but as for journalists, working journalists, I think the attitude is not just.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up the issue of independence of newspapers or the freedom of newspapers. Uh, what would happen to it if we were consistently relying on the government to sustain us. But I would like to draw your attention, Mr. Ram, to a specific comment Sonia Gandhi made. I'm just now swerving away from the issue of the Hindu. I'm going into larger issues. Sonia Gandhi, the Congress president, in her set of suggestions, made a very acute point about the government, suggesting to the government that they should suspend government advertising for the next couple of years, so that there could be some amount of money on the table for the government to play with. I saw that a fair few newspapers, led by the Indian Express in Delhi, were vehement in their criticism of Sonia Gandhi's criticism. Sonia Gandhi made a whole lot of other very fine points. She said, let's not go ahead with the Central Vista. That did not engage newspapers. She said, let's stop foreign travel for the president and the prime minister and for ministers for a couple of years. That did not have any carry. But on the other hand, the simple suggestion that you should suspend government advertising in the media for the next 2 years seemed to have got a whole lot of newspapers, led by the Indian Express, quite strangely, to get all very agitated. And it really perturbed me that it's come to a state, the current state, because of coronavirus, that we now seek government advertising almost as a matter of right.
Yes, that says it all about what's wrong with the Indian newspaper sector today. That you're only interested in yourself, special interest pleading. As you said, you get agitated, go virtually over the top when a perfectly arguable suggestion is made. I have no problem with that suggestion, because in any case, advertising is used as patronage now. not just by the central government, but by several state governments as well. So if government advertising is stopped for the larger national good, I have no problems with that. And it's, I think, a suggestion worth considering. And as you say, the other suggestions, the Central Vista in particular, which is going to be a huge, how shall I describe it? Completely unwanted project at any time, but certainly at this time. What it does to heritage, what it does to open spaces for people who assemble there. I think that deserved a lot of support. Even before this pandemic crisis hit us, I think that didn't get much play because it was seen to be just a Delhi affair. And also there was a general reluctance to take on the central government, the BJP government, the Modi government on issues like that. And suspending foreign travel for the president, absolutely. There's no need for the president to go abroad at all. The Prime Minister for his whole term, I think.
Yeah.
But if the Prime Minister needs to go on specific business as head of government, then it has to be very, you may not go for a blanket ban, but you'll have to economize on that. These are the gestures that will make that will inspire people or encourage people to chip in to overcome this crisis. When they talk about national unity, one nation, one people, and all that stuff, that's the kind of example that leaders should set, and including leaders of all political parties. So, because Sonia Gandhi has got it right, I think. I agree with that.
Mr. Ram, to move away from that and to these larger issues, how have you viewed the coronavirus coverage in India in specific so far? And how would you compare it with coverage, let's say, in the US or in the UK? How do you think Indian media, especially television media and print media, how have they fared, do you think?
I think the coverage has not been bad in what I see, but I think you see a much larger section of the Indian media. I'm not aware. I don't follow all that in various languages. For example, my Hindi is very, virtually non-existent. I can't follow the Hindi media, and then we largely listen to on television. I go to NDTV. Largely, I avoid channels like Republic or even Times Now because of a lot of propaganda gets onto that. So you can do without that. But I think the coverage in those sections of the Indian media, newspapers, which I read largely online now, although we do get the printed newspapers delivered in Chennai. In the south, I think physical distribution is actually better. So I read them as well. But from what I see, the coverage has exceeded my expectations. My expectations are not very high.
Right.
But I think some of it has been informative. They've talked to scientists. In what I've seen, there's not too much of what can be called misinformation or disinformation. But I would say the Hindu, even if I say so, has done good coverage overall. Different points of view, some of it very critical, certainly independent. Many scientists have questioned strategies resorted to here, but they have not exaggerated. Nobody has exaggerated. There's not been any kind of alarmist coverage and so on. Depending on the ownership of particular newspapers, here I don't think I should name them. I think you see various kinds of slants. Targeting Mamta Banerjee, for example, in one newspaper, when she does something that can't be defended, but in an excessive way, and letting off somebody else. And then there's been this whole this Tablighi Jamaat business. I think they were quite foolish in doing but it was before the lockdown. But what about what some Hindu gurus have done? You had what happened in this, the Sadhguru whole thing. But of course, before the lockdown, they danced and various other places. Some women, I only sympathize with them. They went on pilgrimage They got caught. A few positive cases have been identified in Tamil Nadu. But the media, some sections of the media gave, lopsided coverage to what has spread through these people returning from the conference in Delhi, the Nizamuddin conference, and virtually no coverage or virtually marginal coverage of what other religious congregations have resulted in. I think
let's come back to this communalism issue in a bit, Mr. Ram. Let's go back to something you said. You said your expectations that the coverage so far has exceeded expectations. Why did you have low expectations to start with? Why did you expect less than what we have delivered so far?
Because in the last 6 years or so, a lot of the Indian media, the dominant media, the so-called mainstream media, have functioned to a significant extent as propaganda arms of the government. That is very clear. And there's, of course, this famous saying, these lines about the British journalists. I must have said it before. Conversations. You can't hope to bribe or twist, thank God. Humpert Wolf. You can't, the British journalist, but considering what the man will do unasked, there's no occasion to. So really applied to this, because there were spaces for independent and free-ranging expression of views, of at least reports, analysis, also comment, but it was largely self-regulation or self-censorship imposed on themselves. We have seen this before on many issues. TV news channels have been notorious in many cases for this. Propaganda arms and the kind of demonization of people who are opposed to those in power in Delhi, I think, became quite notorious. So all that shaped my low expectations.
Excellent. I'm very happy that you are so candid about this, because I was coming to that. Mr. Modi seems to have shown a bit of a shift in his media strategy, and in fact to reverse in the last month or so. And here is where I think he's doing so. He has actually met or actually interfaced with media owners, print and electronic, via video. There has been a significant shift in the way in which the Press Information Bureau is working. There's now like in Singapore, there is now a whole new vigilante force trying to stop so-called fake news. You can see a whole lot of things that have happened. Would you suspect, Mr. Ram, that some of the meek coverage, especially in the language newspapers, is coming as a result of these owners? And he only met owners, not editors. By meeting these owners, he was able to co-opt some of this kind of media in the languages.
First, let me disclose I wasn't invited. I'm the chairman of the Hindu Publishing Group. But anyway, I don't think they really got a word in, many of them. They were not able to. There was no two-way communication in large part. Maybe some chosen few were invited to speak, but it was largely, a monologue.
A one-way communication.
This is what I learned from, and also there were some reports and so on. But it is interesting, nevertheless, that for a government that has had little time for, for example, no interviews, no press conferences for the professional media, because they largely banked on social media. This time they gave some weightage to professional media.
Why do you think they felt the need for that at this juncture?
Because they realized the truth that the professional media matter more than the social media, because there's great trust. At a time of crisis, people will want reliable information. A certain section will go for self-enforcement of their obscurantist beliefs. But people by and large want to be safe and do well, weather the crisis. So they're looking for reliable information, which you can expect only at least when there's no political angle to it, things like wash your hands, uh, how you should do it using soap. If you touch surfaces, don't use your fingers and go to your face or your nose or your mouth, your eyes. If you have to touch your face, use your elbow. All these practical things, I think, have been communicated largely through these. It's best communicated through professional media. But I want to say here that some of the governments, Krishna, have been remarkably transparent.
Yeah.
I'll give two examples, Kerala and Tamil Nadu, which I followed carefully. I think this daily press conference,
Yes,
Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan holds himself, has become quite an institution. People look forward to it all over. And you see a similar thing is happening in New York with Governor Andrew, where people look forward to it. But I think they're very open about this. But apart from that, I think everything is brought out into the public domain about the virus, the dangers, and so on. And they don't issue names. Similarly, in Tamil Nadu, I'm pleased to say, initially, I think there was largely silence. But once the government decided to open up, you have daily media bulletins, and I can send you a couple of them, for you to sample. Very, very detailed. They don't name names, which is correct. But every patient, the status is listed. How many tests are done, how many reported positive, how many ventilators they have, and so on. Hospital facilities. All these are out in the public domain, and they are being hyperactive in interacting with the media. I don't know about various other states. Some of them don't do it. But I think Rajasthan does it. But
Pinarayi Vijayan has really been a bit of a revelation in the last couple of years, especially with the media. And I suppose he has some experience because of the flood in Kerala, because of the Nipah virus before, and so on. So I think he's led the game in that sense. But to come back to the Modi issue, this co-option of regional media, has that paid off, do you think? I mean, besides the fact that we should wash our hands and be careful and so on, that's okay. But has Mr. Modi succeeded in blunting the edge of regional media and even maybe substantial sections of English media? And I ask you this question, Mr. Ram, because of this one simple fact, which is if you look at coverage in the US and in the UK, if you look at the New York Times, Washington Post, and in the UK, just the Sunday Times, London last Sunday, you see how prime ministers and presidents are being put to account on what they have done, in terms of response to coronavirus since end December, early January. And you don't find that kind of scrutiny at all in India in any newspaper about what the prime minister was doing between January 1st and March 15th. There is just no mention of that. So I'm asking you very simply whether you think this kind of co-option, this kind of so-called meeting with owners and editors has paid off in a way that we don't ask the key questions. We don't ask questions about the obscurantism that the prime minister propagates otherwise. We don't ask questions about what he was doing, hugging Mr. Trump in Ahmedabad, although, many people had warned him not to, etc., etc. So it seems like it has somewhat paid off.
It's possible. But even without it, I think a lot of the media would behave exactly like this. I'm not aware of all the coverage in the regional media, even the bulk of the coverage. But there was criticism when the migrant laborers, the sudden announcement, it came like an ambush. Now, in all other countries, and also in states like Tamil Nadu, for example, they have tightened the lockdown from today. From tomorrow, it's going to be much tighter, except for essential services and media, for 4 days. I don't know why just 4 days, but 2 days notice is given, whether it's in Singapore or elsewhere. You give notice that there will be a lockdown, but you don't announce 4 hours before, which I think is what created that crisis, at least for that period of time, when people didn't know where they wanted to go home. They were stranded. They had no food, no proper food or shelter. I think something has been done after that.
Yes.
But there has been that issue.
Yeah.
That
They did do something
I think there
with
was
that.
coverage. There was coverage on NDTV and I think the Hindu, and I don't know about others. Maybe some other newspapers too,
Yeah.
but not the kind of hard hitting professional scrutiny that you were talking about. I agree with that.
Yeah, yeah. No, they did do something after the migration crisis, because that's how we slipped into the communalism problem, because that's how the Tablighi Jamaat trump card was pulled out. And that kept the Hindi media extremely engaged for many, many days.
Yes.
How do you view, Mr. Ram, the
Again,
communalism?
I want to speak about one bright spot in Tamil Nadu. I think there were some indications this may happen, but quickly I think the government changed track. They they didn't say Tablighi at all. They would speak about, first they spoke about single source event, of course, which people could guess what that was, and then they dropped the whole thing. They obscured. You don't know where it comes from. Except they'll say primary infection or contact and so on. But other than that, they've to their credit, they have removed any possibility of campaigning, communal campaigning on this issue, and I hope it's happened in some other states as well.
Yes, it certainly has happened in Karnataka, where B.S. Yediyurappa, who, although he runs a BJP government, went on television to warn people against communalizing the virus. So I think hats off to him for that. But to come to the core question, Mr. Ram, as we wind down in this conversation, why do you think Indian media has come to this pass, especially television media, in terms of communalization? How has it come to this pass?
One is obviously the media will reflect what is happening in society, and the muscular Hindutva campaign or Hindu, has taken over and seized the media. I've seen this before with when Indira Gandhi was at the height of her power. Although we can't really compare this with that, but media have behaved in a way, certainly during the emergency, but even otherwise, we saw, we've seen that. So it's not entirely new. It will reflect. But then I've also been wondering about this question, and we've had conversations on this as well. One is the ownership pattern. There are conflicts of interests involved in ownership of the news media in India. These are well known, and people are afraid their other businesses will suffer. But even if you have no other business, they are still afraid. And that's perhaps a new thing, because in the old days they would talk about the jute press and all that. Perhaps you are too young to remember it, but I'm not. An interest in the jute industry, ownership in the jute industry would somehow compromise your independent journalism. Krishna Menon and others would use that phrase. But I think those were the days. But I also feel it's not just economic interests. It's one is fear, obviously, fear that because agencies have been used notoriously against NDTV, I would say. A recent judgment of the Supreme Court brought that out. How the income tax department, exceeded all bounds and went after them, and it was that assessment was quashed. So use of instruments of state to go after media which was seen to be particularly out of line. But there is one other factor that I've been thinking about, and that is when somebody claims to represent the people, the idea that popular sovereignty. We saw that with Jayalalitha in Tamil Nadu. Whenever the media raised something, she would say, "I have the support of the people." So that fear of this idea of popular sovereignty, how can I stand up against somebody who has so much support in the public? That also, I think, is the back of the mind for media owners, that you are sailing against the current. There's nothing in it for you. It's going to bring you ruin. And above all, you get overawed or intimidated. And there are very few of us who think will be able to say that I'm not influenced by that. Because even if you're not afraid of any immediate consequence yourself, the idea that you stand alone, you're isolated from somebody who has millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people behind him or her, I think is a factor that overawes or even that acts as a censor on what you do. I think on independent journalism. That's we have to have a further conversation on it, because various factors are involved. But I think that is also, I think, a factor that lowers the level of media performance, journalistic performance in India. And if you compare, where free speech is, freedom of the press is today, compared with 30 or 40 years ago, in those days, I don't know about you, I would certainly claim, I was one of them who claimed that compared with any other developing country, we are in an enviable position. And if I say that today, it's fake news.
I'm happy you say that. I think that's very true. Mr. Ram, when I look at all this communalization of the media, I was just reminded of two phrases that we've always been used to. We used to hear the words competitive communalism, and we used to hear the words merchants of hate, if you remember. And that used to be said mostly about political parties and politicians. But now we are in a situation where these phrases, competitive communalism and merchants of hate, actually applies very much to the media.
Yes, I fully agree with that. That I think that is true. It's absolutely true, and we can name those channels we want on your at your expense.
Yeah. Not a problem. So let's wind down to the last couple of questions. Mr. Ram, you have, as owner and proprietor, seen advertising squeezed. You've seen circulation squeezed now because of distribution problems, and you have seen a migration to websites and platforms. In your mind, how relevant is journalism today, do you think, for the reader or the viewer or the listener? How relevant do you think serious journalism, probing, investigative journalism is after this kind of a set of issues?
I think it'll continue to be relevant. How relevant, how it competes with the other interests of readers and viewers is hard to say. How about, especially when you ask about serious journalism, including long-form journalism, investigative journalism. I think it is relevant for certain sections of society. And if you wanted to be artificially optimistic, you'd say people will want, a democracy will want information that's reliable and so on. But we are not so sure, because sometimes Gresham's law will operate in this field also. Bad money will drive the good out of circulation. And we don't really know. But I think journalism, to significant sections of society, I hope, good journalism, independent journalism, serious journalism, analytical journalism, thoughtful journalism, investigative journalism, data journalism. I think all this will be seen as useful and perhaps even valuable. I note that in our journalism school, the Asian College of Journalism, actually more people have applied. Would you believe it? At this stage, Sashi Kumar was telling me the other day. As of now, the number of people who applied is larger than for the corresponding period last academic year. But I'm not surprised by this, because when I was on the board of visitors for the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, I served for many years. The same thing happened during the recession, the financial crisis, and the the economic recession that took place in when was it, 2006, 2007. The same thing happened there. They used to report more people. When there were few jobs in journalism, more people went to J school.
Right.
And it's happening. So maybe people are stocking up, are storing up and preparing for something that could be different.
Yeah.
These are small straws in the wind, I would say. Overall, there's no guarantee that serious journalism, there's no guarantee that it will flourish.
Well, neither you nor I is an astrologer, and we have not seen tomorrow. And not too many people in our profession have seen tomorrow, except maybe Shekhar Gupta sometimes. But if you were to put on your hat and predict, what would be the Hindu 50 years from now, you think?
I think it'll be, print will, I don't know whether we'll still be printing a newspaper 50 years from now. First of all, you've got to survive the situation, not just this pandemic, but I think the trends that we have seen before and which will continue after. Digital, much depends on whether a business model, a viable business model, can be found for going totally digital or largely digital. A few newspapers have done it: the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, of course.
The Times London.
Yes, Times, yeah, because they have deep pockets also. Murdoch, we don't know how much they're actually losing, some of them. But yes, they will undoubtedly survive, and they will, and in India too, there will be media organizations which will survive. And I hope that the Hindu will be a prominent part of that. First of all, it has to be there, a prominent part. But surely it'll be, we are now 141 plus years old. In September, we'll be 142 years old.
Oh.
So we certainly want to go on. But whether you can reach 200 or 175 is all up in the air. We hope it'll happen. But it has to be, you've got to find a model for the future when you can bet that people will not be reading printed newspapers as they, a small part may, as they've been doing for
It's 3 o'clock.
No, but to ask you a counterfactual question, which actually takes us back to the earlier part of this conversation. A counterfactual question is the media in India, especially print media in India, actually paying the price, the whole industry paying the price for embracing the kind of tactics that the Times of India pioneered, which was low cover price, free content, advertiser first, trivialization, dumbing down? Are we now in the situation because we all quickly embraced it, and when we discovered that it was not of great use?
Yeah, I think that is true for a large part when we were still making profits and even good profits. But now I think certainly for the Hindu, we have raised the cover price everywhere.
Yes.
The fear is when there is somebody else is doing a price war, race to the bottom and prices, you sort of fall in line. But that has been resisted to an extent, and now the cover price has been raised. It's still, of course, I mean, if the question is whether the cover price can meet a large part of your cost, the answer is no.
Yeah.
Although right now with fewer pages, we have come to a point when in many markets the newspaper, the sale of the newspaper actually pays for the cost of production. It's come to that even without advertising, but that can't go on for too long in particular markets.
That's right. But there was also an editorial part to that question, which is that we also got into this very bad habit of not respecting domain expertise and expertise of any kind. So therefore, in a situation like this, you find yourself that you don't have proper health reporters, you don't have anybody who's seriously studied any of these issues. And on the other hand, you compare journalism in the US or UK, you just look at journalism in the US, you have your Sanjay Gupta speaking, you have Harish Srinivasan speaking, you have expertise. So what we've paid a combined price, a commercial price on the one hand, and on the other hand, we also paid a very heavy editorial price.
Yes, I think that is true. There's a trend of anti-intellectualism in this, as you said, medical health reporting, and I would also say science reporting is another area that has suffered. I've known some excellent science correspondents. Two examples would be Dr. N.Ram of PTI and our own Dr. R. Ramachandran. who once, I think, dealing with a mathematics subject, it was commented on in an academic journal that he got it right and the New York Times didn't. And we had people like that. There are a few still in some places, but far too few. And I think there's a lot of posturing also. People who lecture you, particularly on television. Some of it is, you can't bear it because they talk down to the viewer. And pose as experts. There's a lot of poseur. Sort of thing, and that's hard. But I think what you've observed is absolutely true. That we have lost this along the way. That kind of in-depth reporting and analysis that was available in the Indian newspaper industry at its best, I think is lacking. But on the other hand, I've known some cases where people have really flowered in this covering this pandemic. They've become resource persons you go to as journalists, not necessarily as experts outside that field, but as journalists in communication with the scientists. First of all, the choice of people you talk to. You've got to have a clear judgment in doing that. Who do you talk to? When you're discussing the question of whether there's going to be herd immunity, or you have to do more testing, so on. You got to know who is reliable, because there are different views out there. And it has been a learning experience, at least to a small degree, in Indian journalism, and I think that's something that is positive. But this may happen only in a few places. I don't know how significant or wide, how the scale of this.
Yes. So, Mr. Ram, let me come to the very last question, and this is a common question I've generally asked of most participants. You mentioned that there is a greater intake or interest in ACJ this time round. What would be your 3 key pieces of advice to any young journalist or a student journalist at this juncture when he looks at all the bad news and bloodbath around him or her?
Come into journalism after thinking carefully about it. See what you want to do. Don't just enter because you think you are a flair for writing, or you speak well, or you come off well on camera. Think about it. Think what you want to do. That I'm talking about people who, even in high school, those who are really interested in this, the last 2 years or so, think about it. Don't come in because it looks romantic. I notice also a lot of young women have been coming into this field at the ACJ. Usually it's 60% of the class are women. You've been teaching, you know that. 55, 60%, sometimes even higher. And so there's something that is very appealing about journalism, but also be hard-headed about it when you're coming in. Because, for example, if you decide to go for undergraduate education in journalism or communication, I wouldn't recommend it. Get a good degree in some other subject, and then if you're sure and still find journalism attractive and basically know what you want to do, then go for a postgraduate course or come to the ACJ or journalism schools like that anywhere, if you can find a good enough one. But need to have a grounding.
And let me.
So that's so I think carefully before you come in. Secondly, value your independence. We teach it at in many journalism schools, but when you go to the newsroom, be sure 90% of the time you'll be asked to do the opposite of what you learned in journalism school. So be prepared for that. How you will handle it, whether you're prepared to lose your job, whether you can circumvent what they are saying, whether you can do it in a surreptitious way, whether you can revolt. Think about it, how much you're capable of doing it. But you can bet that many of the values, particularly around independence, about not being corrupt, not being lobbied into writing something you don't want to write, writing against your conscience, whether you're prepared to stand up for at least a minimum basket of values.
Yes.
That I think is something that you have to think about. And I think there's a good chance that there'll be a critical mass of young journalists who will be prepared to do that.
Yeah.
So I'll stop with two, if I may.
Yeah. Okay. So let me take you to the third one, which means let this be the very last question. What is the one piece of advice or one word you will tell to journalists who are already in their jobs, perhaps at the Hindu, perhaps elsewhere, but who seem to see dark clouds in the horizon? What would you tell them? Just one piece of advice.
Don't worry about what is beyond your control.
That sounds straight out of the Bhagavad Gita. So thank you very much, Mr. Ram, for joining me. This was wonderful to listen to your views and wonderful to hear your wisdom and insight. And I thank you very much for joining me on this episode of JPod. And I hope this has been of some use to our listeners. And I thank you very much, sir, for joining me.
Thank you, Krishna.
Thank you so much, sir.